We're joined by Jim Pfaff of the Conservative Caucus, the president and CEO of the organization. Thank you, sir, for joining us here on Right Side. Take us through this week, especially with the reconciliation bill that seemingly was dead on arrival, but then those votes were whipped with only one Republican not supporting it. So you had that slim majority of 217 to 215. How will that affect President Trump's legislative agenda moving forward?
Well, if it gets passed, it will help it in the short run. There are a few things in the bill that people had disagreements on that even voted for it in terms of how quickly does it reduce the debt. I think Donald Trump is banking on Doge having that effect with the help of Russ Vought over at Office of Management and Budget, get some rescissions in and get some impoundment of funds as well too. And he thinks he can make up the difference there, it seems. The one struggle is going to be with the Senate version. So the House version passes. That's what Donald Trump wanted. It got a lot of tax cuts in and so forth. But the Senate version doesn't include the tax cuts yet. So they're going to have to come up with an agreement between that. There's still a little bit of a fight to go. But net, it helps the president's agenda without a doubt.
Now, you've had a lot of legislative experience as a chief of staff and working in the corridors of Capitol Hill. Do you believe in what Senator Ted Cruz has spoken on, that it should be two separate bills, or are you more inclined to support President Trump's version of putting it all into one bill?
I've been in support of the one bill strategy from far into last year. People I've talked to in Washington, D.C., the consensus was a two bill strategy. But the reality is it's very hard to get two reconciliation bills through Congress in one legislative session. And the history on that is very slim. The other thing is you want to get everything locked up and done because you've got 2026 coming up. You don't want this a second bill hanging over you not because of the merits of the bill, but because of the fact that the political rancor over it is continuing on right as you're going into a campaign season. So I'm for the one bill strategy. I'm not, by the way, entirely happy with the one that's there. It sets some things in place that I'm glad, the border funding and some of the tax cuts. But we still have a deficit situation that is really challenging that we're going to have to aggressively address. And so that comes later if we can get our next budget passed with those cuts.
Now, the administration has suggested with the EB-5 visas through the Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, he touched on this during the cabinet meeting. Of course, Elon Musk mentioning Doge and all of those specific cuts that they have seen and have to go through in the future. But is that a way to scale back that deficit? Or do you think with this reconciliation from the Senate version, we'll have a better opportunity to do just that?
Well, what Howard Lutnick was talking about, and to be candid, I think there's an outside chance we could get 200,000 people to pay $5 million for those visas. We have to obviously make sure that it's a good plan, but that's for a different discussion. But that would have a short-term effect. The systemic problems that are in our spending are not being addressed at all with the current legislation going through. So, for example, a couple quick points on this. Rand Paul offered an amendment on the Senate version that would have immediately cut $1.5 trillion from the budget, and you had 29 senators voting against it. The systemic problem there isn't that the bill didn't pass, it's bad. It's that you have 29 members of the Senate after the results of the last election and how Donald Trump handled his transition all the way through this first month of his presidency, that they wouldn't say, let's just go for it. Okay, that's a systemic problem. The weak link for Donald Trump is Republicans in Congress. But the second problem is this. Spending in 2019, pre-COVID spending, overall government spending was about $4.5 trillion, roughly. If you adjust that for inflation to today and we spent at 2019 levels even adding inflation, that's about $5.39 trillion. We would cut the deficit out entirely if we just set up our spending exactly like we did in 2019. That actually is a reality. It's something that could be done, or something very close to it, and Republicans in Congress aren't willing to do so. There's no reason for us to be spending at COVID levels when COVID is so far gone in reality right now. So that's a big issue they got to deal with.
Yeah, really an interesting point you make, because it seems as if there needs to be a balanced budget amendment or something really written into the Constitution where that has to happen. We've had many state legislatures, whether it's through term limits or balanced budget amendments, or even working with the executives and the governors to balance their state budgets, because they realize that they run out of money over time. Of course, you can always go back and print it, but that skyrockets inflation. The federal government doesn't seem to be able to control itself, especially the first branch of government, Congress. They seem like they can't control themselves regardless of the party. So is there something that could be put into place to make sure that they are held responsible for their out of control spending?
Well, let's always, as a baseline to this answer, remember what Milton Friedman said. Inflation is a problem of government every time and everywhere. So you got to get rid of deficit spending. You got to reduce overall federal spending if you want to get inflation gone in the long run. So from that baseline, let's consider where we got to be here. We've got to have a Congress that is willing to reset everything, to put it back in order and change the paradigms, the paradigm of debt. In 2000 and 2001, the Office of Management and Budget was projecting a payoff of our then roughly $4 trillion debt by 2013. $36 trillion later, and $2 trillion of deficit spending for the foreseeable future. Just look at where we've gone. So how we address it at the Conservative Caucus is we're pushing for term limits. We've had a lot of success in beginning to work with that when Donald Trump was first talking about it in his first term. And we're kind of ramping that up. Donald Trump has already talked about how he'd like to do that. Balanced budget amendments, it's going to be I would love to see that at a federal level, but it's very hard to get that passed. And quite frankly, we've got a Congress that for decades has been unwilling to follow the Constitution anyway. So what's to say that they're even going to follow that edict if we put it in there? This is my biggest beef with the Article 5 movement is how are you going to redraw the Constitution when you can't even get the guys to follow the one we've got on the books, which would solve all the problems. So the last part of this is we need to keep asserting a couple constitutional principles. The first is that, as Donald Trump is showing us so clearly right now, Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution says the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States. If it's executive power authorized by the Constitution, it's the president, not the bureaucrats, not his appointees, no one else that has authority in the executive branch. He has total sovereign power over the executive powers available to him. The second thing we need to assert is Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which severely limits and restricts what Congress can do when it spends money. And we have not had a debate over these two constitutional principles for a long time. In 1974, the Budget Control Act that was passed then attempted to take some steps towards this. This is where we get this 12-bill appropriations process that we never followed since 1998. But if we could get back on that track where we're looking at these things separately, allowing members to offer amendments and cut spending, if we can get back to having that debate, those two aspects of the debate, the spending debate and the executive power debate, I think we could get on the right track. Donald Trump, for now, is the one to get that done on the executive branch level. I don't yet see the leaders in the GOP Congress that are the ones to help on the legislative side.
No, there's no question. I usually tell people that the broken branch of government really is the Congress. And, even Turning Point USA has put out a meme for years now. It's not so much who's in the White House for 4 to 8 years, but rather the people on Capitol Hill for 40 plus years. It was never meant to be a lifetime. It was meant for you to go and then serve a period of time and then go back to the farm, go back to banking, going back to practicing the law, and letting your neighbor then take that place. And they seem to understand that better back during the founding of the country. Now, I understand the Article 1, Section 8 argument. Explain some more of that Article 2, Section 1, how the executive can really, I guess, stop that spending, because I'm just not aware of how the president, in his due diligence and his duties from the executive powers, can actually put a curb on that spending.
Yeah, no, the executive branch has no authority or no part of the gears of Article 1, Section 8. What we need is a Congress, in my opinion, initially through term limits, to have that debate amongst themselves. You know, right now, since 1998, which is the last time that Congress passed all 12 appropriations bills through the normal, what we call regular order process, we have been doing continuing resolutions and omnibus bills. Continuing resolutions where we might pass one or two of the appropriations bills, omnibus bills that are just trying to get the whole thing done at the end of the budget cycle. Those processes, CRs and omnibuses, are run by four people: the Speaker of the House and the Minority Leader of the House, the Majority Leader in the Senate and the Minority Leader in the Senate. Those are the four people who write the bills with, shock, the help of lobbyists. Like, they literally have lobbyists in the office writing these bills and giving their input. That process is probably the main reason why we are so out of whack in federal spending. That's got to change, because what happens is they write these large bills, they throw it on the floor, they put it through the Rules Committee and throw it on the floor. No one can offer amendments. You constantly have members of Congress in the Rules Committee trying to get their amendment approved to be considered on the floor. The process is entirely shut down. This is one of the biggest reasons it's gotten so out of hand. So Congress needs to take a look at itself. They need to take a look at their 39% approval rating, much worse for Democrats, by the way, but overall 39% approval rating or less. And they need to ask themselves, why do the American people dislike them? Why are they so disgusted with them? It's because they don't cut the spending. They don't have priorities that the American people want. So that's the Article 1, Section 8 argument.
And what do you see as the most paramount issues for President Trump to pass before the 2026 elections? Because we know, based on these maps, I always find it funny that our Democrat friends seem to complain a little bit more about the Electoral College, about the drawing of maps. Of course, certain states have serious issues with gerrymandering. I'll just take, for example, a Republican state, Texas, a lot of gerrymandering. Illinois, a big Democrat state, a lot of gerrymandering, perhaps the most in the country. So it's a bipartisan problem because, again, you have lobbyist lawyers who are involved in those redrawing of those maps. But what do you see as the most important issues for President Trump to get over the finish line in 2 years? Because we could easily see a Democrat majority in the House come after 2026.
There's no doubt that a Democrat majority could come. I'm not yet predicting it. We've got a few things to play out here. But here are some of the fundamental things that must happen for Republicans to maintain and maybe expand their majorities in 2026. First of all, they need to cut spending. Like, we got this bill done. They need to cut spending. And frankly, they need to just tell the Democrats over in the Senate, screw you, we're getting rid of the filibuster, we're just going to press it on through. But they had an opportunity with Rand Paul's amendment that I mentioned earlier, the cut of $1.5 trillion. They need to figure out a way to do that. If right now what's happening with this bill that's going to be passed on March 14th or by March 14th, it doesn't quite get the messaging job done. Because the argument in the off-year elections that has to be made is, why should you have us in charge of Congress? And Republicans in Congress have no message in that regard. They're going to need the help of Donald Trump just to maintain their majorities, unless they can cut spending. They also need to have some legislative wins in areas that were important to people this last time around. For example, eliminating censorship opportunities by having some positive legislation that says the executive branch may not stop free speech in any manner. They need to, I would like to see them pass a bill that says non-government organizations can never again receive money from the federal government. Only contractors, like, and our defense spending is way out of hand. But like the Defense Department, as bad as it is a better process. These non-government organizations that funnel money to left-wing organizations, if they could take some steps to show that the chances of that happening are very low again, that would cause the American people to say of Republicans in 2026, yeah, we'll give you another 2 years and a chance to do a little bit more. It's going to have to be things like that. And then, by the way, it probably should go even further with immigration law. They should maybe take a chance to sit down with Tom Homan and say, what more do you need legislatively in the law that can help you get the job done that you want to get done? Offer that legislation on the floor with Tom Homan's blessing, because that's the guy you want to ask about this. And then just move with that. And like, I'm not telling Tom Homan to be a lobbyist. What I am saying is get his ideas, let him say, yeah, that would give me the tools that I need, explain why. And the American people, I think, might give him a chance in 2026. If they just stop with what they are completing right now by March 14th and they don't do anything more, I think they're going to have a very hard argument when it comes election time next year.
And do you think it's a problem of people being there too long, that you've had this out of control spending? Are they just focused on bringing too much pork back to their districts? Is it lawyers? Is it lobbyists? Why do you think this is so out of control, and why the Congress seems to be such a broken branch of government?
Yeah, I think one of the big reasons for that is that, to be candid, these people need their $174,000 a year income. There are a lot of people, I've been talking privately with people about this for months now. I spent 8 or 9 years on Capitol Hill. The one thing that I saw very clearly is that people at threat of losing that paycheck, because see, when you go into Congress, unless you're independently wealthy, you have nothing to fall back on, because it does consume all your time. It's more than your typical full-time job. I lived it. And so the thing that they have to do, unless they're really young and have an opportunity and the willingness to do so, is they have to go and make the right votes so they have a chance to get a job on K Street or with some major outside organization that's going to pay their salary if they can't continue on in Congress. Right now, in recent decades, the average tenure of a congressman is roughly about 6 to 7 years. That actually fits the term limits thing. I think we need to pin that down because it hasn't always been that good. But they're not there for their whole careers. They got to figure something out. I mean, campaigns are lost, redrawing of the districts happen, and opportunities are lost for them to continue on. They get redrawn into different districts. So that is actually one big corrupting influence that happens to be there. The other part of that corrupting influence, frankly, is what Donald Trump is addressing positively in the executive branch, which is to change the way that that regulation happens, so that and these butting of heads between branches of government can be very healthy, because when Congress feels gone over by Donald Trump pressing ahead with his agenda, then that makes them have to be more precise in the bills that they write and draw, rather than giving a lot of flexibility to the executive branch. They have a prerogative to do that. That flexibility Donald Trump's taking advantage of right now in a positive way to reduce spending. If he can be successful at that, and then we can have, and I don't know who the nominee will be for 2028, but if it's J.D. Vance, say, or even Ron DeSantis, whatever, those two guys are guys I think might go in to the executive branch as president and say, no, we're going to continue on just the way that Donald Trump was, and they have the gumption to do it. So if we can have 8 more years of a Donald Trump style executive branch, then we can change this paradigm, and then we're just going to have to do the work to get Congress, get new people in Congress who'll have these new ideas and hold on to them.
Expert insight from Jim Pfaff of the Conservative Caucus. Thank you, sir, for sharing so much of your insight from your days on Capitol Hill, but also your thoughts on the near future as President Trump working at a breakneck pace with his administration to solve this spending and inflation and national debt crisis. Please come back on the show. We'll see you again very soon.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me on.